Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Championship Showcase, Secrets for Success from the playing field of competition to the field of life. We are speaking with inspirational sports leaders who are sharing their life strategies and empowering messages of hope, purpose, to support those athletes that are seeking to make successful transition from the playing field of competition to the field of life. Today, we are speaking with a very talented former professional athlete, author, and keynote speaker, Mike Robbins. Prior to his speaking, writing, and consulting career, Mike was drafted by the New York Yankees out of high school. He turned the Yankees down and instead chose to play baseball for Stanford University, where he pitched in the College Baseball World Series. He was drafted by the Kansas City Royals out of Stanford and played 3 seasons of professional baseball with the Royals organization before arm injuries ended his playing career. Mike is the author of 3 books, Focus on the Good Stuff, Be Yourself, Everyone Else Is Already Taken, and Nothing Changes Until You Do, which have been translated into 14 different languages. Mike delivers keynotes and seminars that empower people, teams, and organizations to work together effectively and be more successful. His clients include some of the top organizations and institutions in the world, such as Google, Wells Fargo, Microsoft, Twitter, the U.S. Department of Labor, Chevron, eBay, the San Francisco Giants of Major League Baseball, and many others. Mike has been featured on ABC News, the Oprah Radio Network, and Forbes, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, and again, many others. Since 2008, he has been a regular contributor to the Huffington Post. Mike is the host of his own radio show, Nothing Changes Until You Do, on Hay House Radio. He has inspired tens of thousands of people around the world to reach new levels of awareness and productivity, both personally and professionally. In addition to earning a degree from Stanford, Mike has continued to educate himself. He has extensively studied many disciplines of both personal and professional development and received training from the Coaches Training Institute. You can see why we are so thrilled to have Mike with us today. Mike, welcome to the Championship Showcase.
Hey, glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Well, we know you're very busy, and we really appreciate you taking some time from your busy schedule to speak with us. I have to start right off the bat, no pun intended. It's every little leaguer's dream to play for the New York Yankees, and you turned down an opportunity to play for them right out of high school. Mike, tell us about that.
Yeah, well, listen, from the time I was little, all I ever wanted to do was play in the big leagues myself, and when I got drafted by the Yankees, it was a huge honor. But, one thing I often tell people, I got drafted out of high school in 1992, and, the Yankees are probably the most successful pro sports franchise in any sport in the history of sports. They won 27 World Series and all that. But they were in a bit of a lull at that time, if you sort of know a little bit of the history of baseball. Like, they hadn't been to the World Series since 81, and they lost in 81 to the Dodgers. I think they'd won it in either 77 or 78. But this was now 92. They hadn't even been to the playoffs in like 10 or 11 years. So the mystique of the Yankees was a little down at that time. A few years later, Derek Jeter got to the big leagues, and then they went on a nice little run and won a bunch of World Series again. So, but really for me it was more, I wanted to go play pro ball, but I wanted to get an opportunity to get my education. And the baseball program at Stanford was so good in a very practical sense. I realized, look, if I can play at Stanford, I'll get drafted again. And if something doesn't work out for me baseball-wise, I'll have a degree. So it was sort of a calculated risk not to sign with the Yankees and to go on to Stanford. And then I did end up getting drafted after my junior year at Stanford by the Royals. So from a pro baseball standpoint, it all worked out fine for me.
Well, good. And it's always good when those decisions do work out. And you really can't go wrong when you're deciding on education, putting that first anyway. So, great story. For those who may not be as familiar with you as we are, can you tell us a little bit about your story, maybe what led up to that point?
Yeah, I grew up in Oakland, single mom, did get drafted by the Yankees, right? Didn't go to Stanford. Then I get drafted by the Royals out of Stanford as a junior and signed my contract. And, the way it works in baseball, I'm sure most everybody listening to us knows, you sign with a major league team, you have to go into the minor leagues. And, different than some of the other pro sports, it's still quite a bit of a journey once you sign a pro contract, even to make it to the big leagues. Not an easy thing to do. And I was doing pretty well in the Royal system, left-handed pitcher, which is a good thing to be since there's a lot less of us, and tends to be a hot commodity in baseball. And I was doing well, working my way up. And my third season, though, in the minors with Kansas City, I went out to pitch one night in summer of 1997. I threw one pitch tore ligaments in my elbow and blew my arm out. So, there I was, 23. I mean, I had gone to Stanford and gotten my degree, but I didn't know what else I was going to do with my life. And at the time I got hurt, I didn't know that, my career was over. I knew the season was over because I got hurt pretty bad. I was playing on the East Coast, and they sent me back to California, and I had an operation on my arm that summer. I ended up having 3 operations over the next 2 years, did everything I possibly could to try to come back and play because I loved it. But unfortunately, when all the surgeries were done and I had done everything, the doctors had told me to do and all the rehab and whatnot, I wasn't able to make it back to where I needed to be to continue to play at that level. So I had to walk away from the game. And it was tough. It was tough because, like most of us athletes, that had been the focus of my life. That had been my identity. That's the thing that I was good at. That's what I felt like made me sort of unique and different and special and all those things. And so trying to figure out who I was without that and what to do next was no small thing, and definitely a challenging journey for sure.
Yes, and making it to the big leagues, you have to put a lot of time and dedication into it. Before we kind of get into some of the transition stuff, what did athletics do for you growing up? For a lot of guys, they say, well, it kept them out of trouble, kept them in school. Right. What was it for you growing up?
Look, I grew up going to city schools in Oakland, and a lot of the kids I played with, both baseball, which was my primary sport, although I played basketball. I wasn't nearly as good of a basketball player, but I liked it. A lot of kids get in trouble, especially by the time junior high, high school, drugs and gangs and things going on. I was fortunate. I think the thing that sports did for me, mostly all good stuff. There were some things later on in my life I realized the sort of dark side of it, if you will, but it definitely kept me focused. And, my parents split up when I was 3, and my dad wasn't around a lot, and he struggled with mental illness, had bipolar disorder, and so for me, the baseball was kind of an escape. It was a place that I felt like I was good. I got some praise and recognition. I got to focus. My mom was very supportive. She'd been a PE teacher, and she's actually the one that taught me how to play, and very supportive of me. And so it just became this way. It sort of oriented, I think like a lot of us as athletes, my whole life was sort of oriented around it. And when all my friends started drinking and hanging out and doing stuff that, not terrible stuff, just normal teenage stuff, like I didn't really do any of that because I was pretty focused. It's like, look, I want to get good grades, so I have an option to go play in college if that happens, and I want to be really focused on the baseball field, so if I get a chance to go play professionally, I can do that. And I'm not a big, huge guy. Barely 6 feet tall, and, so I wasn't physically dominant, if you will, and didn't throw, 100 miles an hour, so I kind of had to work really hard. So it taught me a lot about working hard. It taught me a lot about dealing with stress and pressure and fear, which has served me really well in my life. I think a few of the dark side things that I learned later on is, a lot of, not simply just when it ended and then how do I transition from that. That had its own challenges. But I think one of the things that can happen for us as athletes is we get so intensely focused on outcome, right? It's all about winning. It's all about succeeding and putting up, in baseball, there's so many numbers and statistics that a lot of times, I think it's easy to forget about the process or forget about people or to, just to be so sort of laser focused on the outcome, and also then to determine our worth and, value as human beings based on how we perform and compete, because there's so much hierarchy in sports. It literally is like you start or you sit on the bench, or you're the ace of the staff and, as a pitcher, you're in the starting, rotation as a pitcher, or, in basketball, you're in the starting 5, or in football, you're on the first team or the second team. Right. So, all of that pecking order stuff, which drove me crazy in some ways in sports, but it's like this sort of constant, insatiable, I want to be the best player on the team, I want to be the best player in the league, and it's like no matter how good you are, the thing about sports is like the end of the season, one team wins, everybody else loses, right? One person gets the most valuable player award and everybody else doesn't. There's kind of a scarcity built into it, which I think poses some challenges for all athletes, and it definitely had some impact on me. Even now in my life, I got to be mindful of the fact that, like, I can definitely get into that mode when it's like, no matter what success I have, it's like, yeah, it could be better, it should be better, I got to keep going. And, you know, there's some value to that at times, and there's some real detriment to that. We got to be careful.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, all those things you're talking about contribute, and I don't think people realize the residue that's left over. I mean, you could have left, you know, sports 5, 10, 15 years ago, and some of that residual feelings like you're talking about of being mindful of some of that competitiveness or that pecking order comes into play in business and relationships. And, you know, it can be a challenge to not let yourself go there like you would on the competitive field in real life, because it doesn't work the same.
Right, exactly. Well, and you know, it's been, I mean, I threw my last pitch as a baseball player in June of 1997. So, like, we're talking, you know, over 18 years ago.
Right.
You know, I'm 41 years old now, but it's like I still, at least once every other month, I still have a baseball dream. And my baseball dreams usually go like this. It's some version of I'm either in college or I'm in pro ball, and in the dream, I'm me now in my life. So I'm, you know, 40, 41 years old, and they're like, Robbins, get in the game. You got to get, like, and I'm like, oh, I get to pitch again? Sweet. And I'm fired up. I'm always fired up, like, awesome. I love it. But I, like, can't find my glove, or I can't get my spikes on, or something. I can't, you know what I mean? They're getting the game, and I'm like, I'm coming, and I never get in the game, and it's like this super stressful dream, and I wake up and like, oh, geez, it was just a dream. And I'm simultaneously kind of like, happy it was just a dream because it was kind of stressful, and then a little bummed, like, oh, I guess I don't get to pitch again. And then it's this weird thing that even all these years later, it's like part of me sort of can't believe I don't play anymore. And then another part of me, it's been so long, it's like I hardly remember what it was like, because, you know, but it's still sort of in my bones at such a deep level.
Yeah. That, you know, that's so funny, because I've had the same exact dream as a professional soccer player, same exact thing. My shoes don't fit, or I don't have directions to the field, or
right.
I'm at the wrong field, but the game's starting, and I'm getting phone calls. I'm supposed to be here, but I can't get there. Oh my gosh!
Isn't that crazy? Like, I don't know what that is, but yeah, there's a lot of people. You know, it's like, you know, you show up without your pants or your shorts or some version of like you can't do it, and it's just like it never quite happens.
Right. Well, listen, as you, I know you're obviously well aware of the challenges. But as your career started going down, or as a doctor, as you knew the arm wasn't going to, you know, be able to serve you, did you think transitioning into the real world would be easy, or were you surprised by what showed up for you?
You know, that's a great question. I think I was, you know, as I look back on it now, I was upset, right? It ended pretty abruptly on me, and I was scared. Like, I don't know, you know, gosh, I'd spent all this time. I mean, I was only, you know, 23 when I first got hurt, and probably, you know, 25. My 25th birthday was when I officially told my family, like, I'm done trying to come back. I had actually gotten a job a couple months prior to that in San Francisco working in the .com world, because it was the late 90s, and that's kind of what was happening. But I still was sort of flirting with the idea of, like, maybe I can still, if my arm feels good enough, maybe I'll try to get picked up again. And but I think that I felt, even though I was only 24, 25 years old, I felt old at the time, right? Because it felt like my friends who'd all graduated from college and were all sort of getting their careers started, they were a couple years ahead of me and sort of had, you know, they'd gone through all the stuff in college where they went and, like, met with recruiters and got their resumes together and did all that practical stuff that I was sort of arrogantly like, I don't need to do that. I'm going to the big leagues, right? So I didn't pay attention.
Right.
So then I just sort of felt like, man, I should have paid more attention to that stuff. You know, and at that age and at that time, I just sort of, I mean, a couple of years seemed like it made a big difference. And looking back, it's like, I don't know what I was freaking out about. It's like I was, you know, in my early 20s, mid-20s, like, but I think ultimately I was searching, and, you know, for better or worse, the job market was really good at that time, particularly in the area where I live. And so getting a job was really easy. Once I got the job, though, it was like such a rude awakening because I hated it.
Yeah.
I mean, just the structure of, you know, showing up every day and being there and learning a bunch of really basic things about how business works and work works and life works. And I wasn't that good at it, and I wasn't that inspired by it, and it didn't feel like it didn't have anywhere near the same juice and excitement to me that sports did. And I remember thinking, after like a year working of like, God, this is really awful.
Yeah.
Because I was still really searching and trying to go through my own journey and my own process of healing. I was physically healed enough. I mean, my arm didn't hurt anymore, but just mentally, emotionally. And I remember thinking to myself, gosh, maybe that was it for me. That was my shot to like be somebody and do something. But I had a huge insight. I don't remember exactly when it was, but it was sometime in that first year where I sort of saw my life, and I fast forwarded, and I was like in my 50s or my 60s, and like literally saw myself sitting at the end of a bar drinking and telling stories. I used to be it was like this sort of glory day story. And I thought, wait a minute, hold on. I don't want to be that dude. I just don't want that to be my life. Like, I'm bummed that it didn't work out. I'm bummed that I'm not playing anymore. I'm not sure I'm ever going to find anything that's going to fire me up like that again.
Yeah.
And I don't know exactly what it's going to take for me to completely get over this, but I tell you what, like, I'm way too young to be throwing in the towel on my dreams at this point, and I don't want the rest of my life to be defined by the fact that I didn't make it and I coulda, shoulda, woulda, all that stuff. And so it was just more of a commitment to myself. And something that had been percolating in me for a number of years, even when I was still playing, I always kind of had this fantasy. I wanted to make it to the big leagues, and as an athlete, I had my own personal ambition and, go pitch at Yankee Stadium and do the whole thing and all that stuff that I wanted to do. But there was this part, and the older I got, even when I was still playing, and then even after I got done playing, I realized what I really would have loved to have done is do that and then been able to use that platform. If I had been not just a big leaguer, but even like a really, really good, well-known, like people knew my name and listened to me because I was this, sports star, to use that platform to do some good things in the world. Because I remember standing back, and not to be all holier than thou about it, but there were athletes. Like I remember, I grew up in Oakland. I was a big Oakland A's fan, and one of the big stars for the Oakland A's, the two big stars at the time when I was growing up as a kid were Ricky Henderson and Jose Canseco.
Right, yeah.
And both of them were great athletes, but both of them, especially Ricky, kind of kept to himself and didn't really get in too much trouble, but Jose kept getting in trouble and doing crazy things and racing cars and guns and all kinds of nonsense. And I remember just thinking, like, God, what a waste. He's such an amazing athlete and great talent, and, like, people listen to him, and, like, why isn't he doing anything more with that? Why isn't he, you know what I mean? And I just, it wasn't like some, again, sort of, I wasn't trying to be all, self-righteous about it, but I just thought, gosh, there's not that many people on the planet that are that good that people pay attention to. Like, so, and when baseball ended, the dream of me making it ended, but then it felt like this dream of me making a difference and being someone who could actually have an impact in the world. But that's what I started to rekindle a little bit, and I realized, and got a lot of help and feedback on this, is like, hey, man, there's a lot of other ways to make a difference in the world than by being a Major League Baseball player.
Right.
And that's what ultimately got me on my path to start speaking and writing and doing the work that I've been doing for the last 15 years.
Well, I think that's tremendous. And the key, or the piece that I kind of want to focus in on a little bit is there's a lot of athletes that their dream, like you said, is to pitch or play, at the highest level in the biggest game. And when that doesn't happen, they really didn't have a second, biggest dream, like be the CEO of a company or you wanted to make a difference, but that came kind of almost later after looking at some of these other athletes. But so you talk about this platform to do good. Yep. How long after you got done playing did you start thinking that maybe this is where I could go, this is how I could have purpose and value? Because that the time span between you're done and when that new dream takes place, I think is where most athletes really struggle. A lot of them don't come out of it, and they can't get out of it, and they don't know where to turn.
Well, so it is tough. It's tough. One of the first books that I wanted to write, I never wrote this book, and I may still write it one day, was called, the idea of it was called What Happens When You Don't Make It. And it was going to be me sort of telling my story, and it wouldn't just be about athletes, but it would be about anybody who grew up doing something where you had a big dream, there was something you were actually focused on doing, like playing sports, and for whatever reason, sometimes life just gets in the way or it just didn't turn out, and sort of how do you move on from that? And a couple of things, for me and my story, and when I do coach or counsel or talk to athletes, look, it's great if you, I feel really blessed that within a relatively short amount of time. I mean, I get hurt in 97. I'm sort of done playing. The Royals released me in 98. I'm still rehabbing my injury. I finally sort of officially retire at 99. I'd already gotten a job. But by the middle of 2000, after 2 years in the dot-com world, two different companies, dot-com bubble bursts, I got laid off from this startup I was working for, which was kind of a blessing in disguise. Because I was doing this job, and the idea was this company was going to go public, and then we were going to make a bunch of money. And I was like, hey, that's cool. Well, I'm figuring out what I want to do with the rest of my life. Might as well make some money in the process, right?
Right.
But this idea of wanting to write and speak had started even when I was still playing. It was hard for me to articulate. Then when I was done playing, I got a little more serious about it, but it still seemed like this far-fetched, even crazier than making it to the big leagues. I'd walk into bookstores and go, God, I'd love to write a book and go speak and help people. But to get from where I was and as young as I was to there just seemed like craziness,
Right.
But the universe sort of intervened and laid me off, and here I had this time, and the company gave me a little severance, so I had, enough to sort of live on for a couple months. I didn't have to go find a job like tomorrow.
Right.
And I was like, I want to start to do this. And then I ended up meeting this amazing woman who I fell in love with, who became my wife, and she had started her own business. So it was sort of the confluence of a number of things that she really encouraged me. You can do this. You can start your own business. But it was a huge leap of faith. And again, the athletic part of me helped in the sense that I was focused enough and knew enough about taking risks and going for it and doing hard work and all that stuff. But the downside of it as an athlete and as someone who had gotten pretty good at my sport, I don't like sucking at things, right? Most of us don't, but if you've been really good at something, it's hard to go into something and then not be good at it. So that sometimes can be a bit of the challenge. But again, back to not just my own story, but in general, sometimes I think we erroneously think we're supposed to find this other dream that's as big or bigger than the dream we had to go be a pro athlete. And that may or may not happen. And it may take a week, a month, a year, 5 years, 10 years, but it's never going to be exactly the same. Me now and the work that I do, I find the work that I do now much more enlivening and fulfilling than as an athlete. But it's different. There are some things about it that are similar, but I wasn't looking for something to replace baseball for me, because when I've gone down that path, even with my work now, it gets all twisted around. It's like I find myself doing my work, as early on, trying to make it to the big leagues in a different way, and I went, wait, time out. That part of my life is done. I have to now take what I learned from that and turn it into what I'm doing now. And here's the truth. With most sports, you're not going to play that sport for the rest of your life. Even golf, which is one of the ones you can keep playing for a pretty darn long time if you're really good at it, at some point you stop. But in most sports, whether it's soccer or baseball or tennis or football or basketball, you're not playing into your late 30s, 40s for the most part. You're going to be done with your sport at a relatively young age in life. So even if, and I've worked with and talked to very, very successful pro athletes who've made it big and made millions of dollars. And a couple things about them. Number one, a lot of them lose all their money or spend it all. Number two, many of them are as screwed up, if not more screwed up, than the ones who end up their careers ending much earlier, because now imagine being 35 and you were a star, and now you got to figure out, well, who am I? What do I do next?
Right.
So I think I think the erroneous notion is for many of us, like me, who my career ended somewhat early on and never got to, big, well-known, made a lot of money, all that stuff. It's like, oh, woe is me. That's really hard. I never made it. But then it's like, in some ways, on a personal, emotional level, it might have been easier to, blow my arm out at 23 and be done by 25 than be 33. And, I made it to the big leagues, and maybe I was like a middle reliever who made a couple $1 million a year, but now I'm, trying to transition into regular life, and, I wasn't that well known, so I can't just leverage my, hey, I used to play baseball thing.
Right.
I got to figure out what else I want to do, and I have no idea what that is.
Right. And the general public, they, the guy that does make the millions of dollars and does have a long career, they think, well, he's set now because he's made a lot of money.
Yes.
There's still the emotions and all those things that come along with that transition still happen. It's not like just because you make $1 million, or if you, got to the AAA or AA level, you still put the time and effort and energy in there. You're still going to go through that I think Kubler and Ross almost they equate it to the dying process. You're still going to grieve. You're still going to go through that process.
It is a death, and and some of the things I've seen happen over the years, and everybody deals with it differently, but in general, and again, if we're talking about male athletes in particular, most of us, especially as athletes, depending on our age, weren't trained very well or given a lot of support to deal with ourselves emotionally, right? I was talking to a woman about this last night, and she said her son, who's 15, and he's a pretty good basketball and football player, and she said her son literally said to her the other day, "Mom, I'm allowed to have two emotions." And she said, "What two are those?" And he said, "Anger and happiness, but not too happy," right? And she laughed and was like, "Oh, my God, what is going on?" And I was like, we've made a lot of progress on emotional awareness, but still not that much, especially for us as males, because what do? It's like there's not a whole lot of conversation about, well, I feel really sad and lost and depressed about the fact that I'm no longer an athlete. And what tends to happen is people get busy or people start drinking or people just do stuff. I mean, the other thing that I've seen happen with a lot of athletes when they stop playing is immediately go right into coaching or go right into something related to the sport, which, hey, more power to you. But when people ask me, "Hey, Mike, do you want to go into coaching?" when I got done, and I thought about it, because I like the game and I like people and I like talking. I thought that could be a way for me to mentor and make a difference and have an impact. But you know what I said? I said, look, I played for too many coaches over the years who were unresolved about how their careers went. And some of the worst coaches I had were still bitter that it didn't turn out for them the way they wanted to, or they were trying to sort of make it as a coach in a better way because they didn't make it as a player. And I didn't want to be that guy. And I was like, look, if I ever coach, it'll be way later on in my life when I'm completely at peace with how my career turned out, that I'm not trying to fulfill something or resolve something or get something from doing it. I'll literally be doing it as an act of service.
Wow.
And so far in my life, I've done a little bit of athletic coaching over the years. My girls are now 9 and 7, and I did a little, 6 and 7-year-old girls softball coaching or soccer coaching, and that's about the extent of it. And, I'm happy to coach my girls as they move along if they want to be involved in sports. And then when they're gone and out of the house and off in college and wherever, maybe I'll, be a little league or a high school baseball coach for fun if I choose to do that. But, that was my path. And more power, but I think when people go and do that or get involved in, they become agents or they work inside of organizations, and that's all well and good. But, again, I always ask, if I'm asked, from an advice standpoint, is do it because you want to. Do it because you love the game, not just because you're afraid that you don't know anything else besides that.
Right. Well, and the other thing with coaching, too, is as a coach, you really have to decide if you're going to be a coach or you're going to have a family, because you have to go where the jobs are as a coach. If there's an opening, if you're on the West Coast and there's an opening on the East Coast and you want to be a coach, you have to go. You don't really have a choice, so you have to be willing to, it's almost a life, long thing, and your family has to be okay with it. For a lot of, I was in the same boat where I decided that, I wanted to go into coaching, but I'd rather have a family and establish roots than pick up and go where the jobs were, So that might be
and that's the thing, I think. I mean, asking those questions, as athletes, while we're playing, we tend to be in that mode of we'll just go wherever we get opportunities to go. And you kind of, you get drafted or you sign or you get a scholarship or whatever, and you just kind of go and you adjust your life accordingly. As you move out of it, then it becomes more significant in terms of what kind of life do I want to live. One of the best things that happened to me, there's a wonderful man who's mentored me and many others who played baseball at Stanford. He's about 15 years older than I am, named Vince Sikowski. And I wrote about Vince in my first book, Focus on the Good Stuff, because what Vince has become is sort of the unofficial kind of Stanford baseball mentor. He's the guy, his name's Vince Sikowski, we call him VSAC, because, baseball players, we like to make nicknames for everybody and shorten down everybody's name. So when you get done playing, either done at Stanford, or most of us who play at Stanford, if you play a little bit, you're going to get drafted and get a chance to play pro ball. But as soon as you get done, whether it's a year or 5 years or 10 years in, everyone says, hey, call VSAC. And VSAC is this really great guy, very successful in commercial real estate, lives in the Stanford area, Silicon Valley area. And if you call him up, and he'll spend a bunch of time with you. Hey, come down to my office, or we'll have some lunch, and he'll sit there and just talk you through the process. Look, what do you want to do? What kind of life do you want to live? And I sat with him. I was 24 years old, and I sat across the desk from him, and he was, at the time in his late 30s, already very, very successful financially and in business. And he said a couple things to me in that conversation. He said, look, what it takes to be successful enough to play baseball at Stanford, to then play baseball professionally, like you have all the intangible skills that you need to be successful in anything in life. It's just a matter of you choosing what you want to do and the kind of life you want to live, right? And he started breaking it down to me in this way, and he's like, look, it's way harder to get where you got to in that level of athletics than it is to be that successful, relatively speaking, in life and in business if you transfer the skills over. And it was really interesting, and he talked about how, you know, one of the most important aspects of his success in business has been a lot of what he learned as a baseball player, the tenacity of it, the stick-to-itiveness of it. And it was really interesting because I had never thought about, I mean, at that age and at that time, and because I'd just been so focused on baseball, I had never really thought about it in that way. And Vince is somebody that I've stayed in touch with over the years. And one of the things I really appreciate about him is not only the advice that he gave me, but that became and has become one of the outlets for him, in addition to being very successful in his business, is like, I'm going to take the time to mentor these young men as they come out of school or come out of pro baseball to try to figure out what to do next, because I was struggling with it at that time, and there maybe wasn't anybody specifically that could sit down with me and talk me through the process.
Right. Wow, what a great blessing to have a guy like that you could go back to, and maybe not, you know, maybe throughout your life when maybe things or challenges or struggles that maybe occurred, you can go back to him, a guy that sounds like he's had a lot of life experience that could point you in the right direction. What a blessing.
Yeah, for sure. And I also think it's important for everybody to remember, you know, again, if you've played your sport to the degree that you have, whatever that looks like, again, there are an enormous amount of tangible and intangible skills that you've learned. You know, I was sitting on an airplane a couple months ago, and the guy sitting next to me, we started talking, and he was telling me that he owns a business in the Midwest, and anyway, he'd played football in high school and yada yada and all this. But he said, when I hire people, I'm often looking for athletes to hire. And I said, why is that? And he said, well, there's a few things that I know about athletes. Now, everybody's a little different, he said, but if they played sports at any particular level, even just at the high school level, what I know about them is they know how to compete, they know how to get stuff done, they know how to deal with adversity. Depending on the sport, usually they know how to work in team, they know how to collaborate. And, like, there's just something in them that I trust they'll be able to figure it out. Now, it doesn't always work, and it's not like every single athlete is always a rock star in my company and any non-athlete is not. That's not the case, he said, but it's a huge differentiator when I'm hiring people. And he said sometimes I don't think athletes realize, especially when they're young and coming right out of school or right out of playing, that what an asset it is, and they want to be able to figure out how to, you know, he said, I think they need to learn how to leverage that a little bit better, which I thought was an interesting piece of insight.
Yeah, because there are a lot of transferable skills, but then again, there are those kind of that dark side of stuff that you were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
But as we're kind of closing out, Mike, what would you say, the 3 or 4 life lessons, or, you know, that you could share with our audience that would help those guys that are in that time frame of, you know, just finishing or just finished playing and are trying to discover what that next dream is? What could you offer as far as 3 or 4 strategies somebody could implement right now to help them through that?
I think the first thing is to really take some time, if you can, to appreciate and acknowledge yourself. I think the tendency when our playing careers, our sports careers end, there's disappointment, there can be sadness, frustration, it didn't turn out exactly the way that I wanted to, or even if it did, I'm missing it and all that. But, like, acknowledge yourself, the courage it takes to do it, however far along you got. It's not so much about the result, but it's like there were probably a lot of times along the way that you could have and maybe wanted to quit and you didn't. So there's some element of, like, literally and almost even specifically patting yourself on the back. The second thing that I would say is to get some support. Maybe it's a therapist, maybe it's a coach, maybe it's a counselor, maybe it's a friend, but somebody that if you're still in, however long it's been and however short it's been, look, it's like it is grief. You mentioned it earlier. It's grieving a loss. So get some support to help you through the loss. Imagine if you lost a good friend or a parent or someone really close to you. It wouldn't seem weird to say, you know what, I needed some grief support. Now, again, some of us as men in particular have a hard time asking for help, but that's a really important thing. So acknowledge yourself, pat yourself on the back, get some support. And then the third thing is, you know, if you have something that you're like super fired up and you know exactly what you want to do, you're in the minority. Most people are still trying to figure that out. So give yourself some space. You know, some of the support might be to help you sort of grieve the loss, but also get some support about coming up with what could be next for you, what would be exciting for you. Because, again, most people, people who aren't athletes, some people are really clear and focused on what they want to do, others aren't. But most people in general, if they're not athletes, they're spending time in school at least thinking about what I want to do with my life. Most athletes, when they're in school, depending on the sport, unless it's some sport that there's no chance to ever play past school, but if there is, we don't do that. We're thinking about playing our sport for as long as we can. So it's like you want to remember that when you transition, even if you're 30 years old when that happens, you're a different type of 30-year-old. Do you know what I mean? Like you haven't spent the last 30 years with some inquiry about what am I going to be when I grow up? You've known exactly what that is, and now that's not the case. So you do have to start in some ways newly, and that's all right. Just have some compassion for yourself, but get some support with that as well, and know that it's not going to be usually an overnight thing like you wake up one morning and go, now I know I'm going to go do this.
Right.
Because if that's the case, it's almost like, think of it like being in a relationship. Like you're in love with someone, you're in a relationship for 20 years, and then they dump you, and you're heartbroken. It would be weird if like 2 days later you had a new girlfriend and you were off in love again. I mean, not that that never happens, but that would be the minority. And in most cases, if that were the case, you were probably on the rebound and it wasn't really authentically a healthy relationship, right?
Right.
So trying to go find the new dream like next week is probably not the recipe for success.
Right. A little unrealistic as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Well, 3 great strategies. Take time to appreciate and acknowledge yourself. Get support for the grieving process, so to speak, and then also in getting help with somebody who can help maybe map an outline, or at least the initial steps of what that next big thing is for you. Or maybe it will evolve from just that next step, and that happens oftentimes too. Just taking that next step towards something may not be the ultimate thing, but it may lead to the next thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, listen, we're just about out of time, Mike. I really want to thank you for spending some time with us today. Any closing thoughts for our listeners before we kind of sign off here?
No, man, I just appreciate you doing this. I think it's a really important conversation to be having, and thank you for doing it, and thanks for inviting me to be a part of it.
Well, we certainly hope all the listeners enjoyed our conversation with the incredible Mike Robbins, like I have. You've been listening to the Championship Showcase, Secrets for Success from the playing field of competition to the field of life. Again, we want to thank Mike Robbins for joining us, and we encourage those of you who feel you might need some assistance through your career transition. Please get the help you need. Reach out to me or to Mike, and we'll do our best to direct you or lead you or help you in any way we can. But for now, we want to wish you the best always. And again, Mike, thanks for joining us, and we will hopefully talk to you shortly and soon, and we wish you all the best as well. Thank you for joining us.